But cynicism is required to ask to the sovereign government of Cuba to listen to its own people, which is a victim of the policy of the government of the United States, of the policy applied by former President Donald Trump, of the 243 coercive and unilateral measures added to the blockade, especially in the last 2 years, and of the more than 50 measures applied with a cold, calculated, and opportunistic purpose of taking advantage of the conditions of the pandemic that they were suffering, that their own U.S. citizens were suffering, to try to cause a change of regime in Cuba, to choke the Cuban economy, even at the price of difficulting the prevention, the treatment, and the vaccination of our own citizens. President Biden should listen to the overwhelming reiterated will of our people that demand of, in any way and in all diversities, to lift the blockade, the damage that harms all the Cuban families. If the president had any interest or any worrying, and he wants in any way to alleviate the difficulties of the Cuban people created by the policy of previous governments and the policy applied its own government, the decisions, and with his signature, he could modify substantially, without waiting for anything, without the need of the legislative vote. Fundamental aspects of the blockade, including those that harm the Cuban people, including that most affect the fight against the pandemic by our nation. He could urge the Congress of the United States and some of his sovereign prerogatives, and he could suspend the application of Title III of Helms-Burton Act, the authorization of demanding before U.S. courts in a brutal expansion and the application of the U.S. laws to companies, citizens, and governments of third countries beyond the borders of the United States, long ventilators in conditions of the pandemic. The strengthening of the siege policy, of economic choke of the country amidst the pandemic, political operations financed with federal funds of the budget of the United States, which are declared publicly hundreds of millions in the last years, dozens of millions annually, without taking into consideration the cover funds, which are also used in these campaigns. The conduct of the government of the United States, violating the international law, which is a systematic, flagrant violation of the human rights of all the Cubans, It is a threat not only to the international law, to the navigational law, to the free trade norms, to the empire of the law in the international arena, to enjoy the human rights, including the peace right, the nurture right, the childhood rights in Cuba. It is a threat, constant threat to the well-being and to the integrity of our people. On July 11th, in Cuba, we didn't have a social outbreak. We didn't have it because of the will of our people and because of the support of our people to the revolution and to its government. There were many efforts to achieve that. We couldn't criticize the government of the United States for doing not too much. Sometimes, in a public way, they have called, summoning, urging a social outbreak, and working sometimes, and sometimes working in a cover to actually cause that. On July 11, we had disturbances, we had disorder in a limited scale, taking into consideration the difficult situations that we are living, that, however, we cannot compare the situation of Cuba with the rest of the countries. It is a shame that some U.S. spokesperson have said that the Cuban people, as if it was an entire people, were demanding vaccination and attention to the Covid-19 affected people. In Cuba, we do not have common graves of those in New York. You have seen images. We have not seen dying people in the streets as those we saw in Guayaquil by hundreds. We have not had corruption regarding the vaccination as that one of the President of Brazil. We cannot compare the difficulties. The contagious rate, so many people suffering from COVID, the lethality rate that we have in Cuba cannot be compared to what's going on in the entire planet, even in the richest and most developed nations, even in Europe, Western Europe. It is false to talk about COVID to cover the powerful hand that urges from the United States subversion, the fracture of our constitutional order. And there were disturbances generated not only systematically, not only through an investment that has been going on for decades, not only by intensifying those acts in the last 2 years and in the last months, but also of the development of a communicational political operation directed to generating those disorders, with the goal of generating those disorders, even at the price that they happened, as they happened, acts of violence that we reject, that we condemn. So you know, specifically, in the last months of last year until now,